It was a sunny afternoon, the kind of day when the world seemed alive, vibrant with energy and possibility. Jake and his friends were on the outskirts of their small town, exploring an area dotted with abandoned warehouses and forgotten buildings. For Jake, these crumbling places were an endless source of adventure. He was always the leader of the group, the one who proposed the boldest ideas, the ones his friends found impossible to refuse. Even today, Jake had a plan. Before proceeding, I ask you all to subscribe and comment with your opinion, or simply with an amen. Let's get back to us. "Guys, let's go up to the roof of that building," he exclaimed enthusiastically, pointing to an old building with cracked brick walls covered in graffiti. His friends looked at each other doubtfully. "Are you sure? It doesn't sound safe at all," one of them muttered. But Jake, with a bold smile, shook his head. "Don't worry, it'll be great. Trust me." With determination, Jake began to climb a rusty metal ladder that clung precariously to the side of the building. His friends hesitantly followed, their hearts in their throats at every creak of the weathered rungs. When they finally reached the roof, they were left breathless. The view was breathtaking. The town spread out below them, bathed in the golden light of the afternoon sun. Jake, with his arms outstretched, stood at the edge of the roof. "See? I told you it was worth it," he shouted, with the smile of someone who felt invincible. But his confidence soon turned to tragedy. As he leaned out to look at the view, his foot slipped on a patch of gravel. Time seemed to slow down as Jake struggled to regain his balance. His friends stood frozen in terror as they watched him fall. With a chilling thud, Jake's body hit the ground. Then everything went dark. When Jake opened his eyes, he was no longer in the world he knew. There was no sky or earth, just an endless expanse of soft, enveloping light. He felt light, suspended in that strange dimension. Panic began to rise in his chest, but before it could take over, a feeling of warmth and peace enveloped him completely. It was a feeling he had never felt before, as if all fear and pain had been erased. "Where am I?" Jake wondered, his voice echoing in the void. As if answering his question, the light around him began to shift, taking on shapes and colors that defied description. He felt himself being pulled forward, not by any visible force, but by an instinctive pull. Soon, he found himself in a place of extraordinary beauty, a landscape that seemed at once familiar and otherworldly. The air was filled with music, a sweet melody that resonated deep within her soul. The flowers shone with impossible colors, and the ground beneath her feet glistened like polished gold. Jake was not alone. Around him were figures of light, beings that were indistinct but full of love and kindness. One of these figures approached, and Jake, without needing words, knew that it was special. He felt a silent invitation, as if he were being called to step forward. He felt incredibly safe, safer than he had ever felt in his life. "Jake," a voice said. The sound of his name echoed, filling him with a feeling of fullness. He turned, and before him appeared a presence that could not be described as anything other than divine. The figure radiated a light so pure it should have been blinding, but instead it filled him with love and wonder. "You are not alone," the voice continued. "You are here for a purpose." Jake felt a lump in his throat. Who are you?" he managed to stammer. The figure smiled, and Jake instinctively knew the answer. It was Jesus. Not the Jesus of images or paintings, but a presence so real that there was no room for doubt. The peace he had felt until that moment intensified, like a warm embrace that enveloped him. "You still have a life to live," Jesus said, "but there's something you need to see before you come back." Jake nodded, unable to speak, as Jesus touched his shoulder. Suddenly, the world around them changed. Jake found himself in a vast, ever-changing landscape, a living tapestry of images and events. He saw cities and towns, people laughing and hugging, but also scenes of chaos and despair. He saw fires in the streets, crowds shouting in anger, and leaders at podiums, their faces drawn with fear and tension. "The world is at a crossroads," Jesus explained, his voice calm but heavy with sadness. "There is much good, but also forces that seek to divide, corrupt, and lead many away from the light." Jake felt a sense of helplessness rising within him. "What can I do? I'm just a little boy," he asked, his voice shaking. Jesus smiled softly at him. "Sometimes the smallest voices carry the greatest truths." Jesus showed Jake more images, focusing on a man Jake immediately recognized, Donald Trump. He was surrounded by advisors and other figures, some sincere, some blatantly deceitful. Jesus explained that Trump had a crucial role in the future of the world, but that the weight of his decisions was enormous. "With great power comes great responsibility," Jesus said, "but no leader can walk alone." Jake watched Trump in public and private moments, watching him swing between confidence and doubt, hope and despair. For the first time, Jake saw not just the controversial leader, but the man behind the public figure. "What can I do for him?" Jake asked. "You can remind the world of what really matters," Jesus replied, "faith, humility, and vigilance." Jesus then showed Jake a growing darkness, a force that fed on fear, hatred, and division. Jake saw families torn apart, communities consumed by conflict, and leaders blinded by a lust for power. "This is the consequence of turning away from the light," Jesus explained. "But light can overcome even the deepest darkness. It requires faith, courage, and unity." When Jake returned to his body, the pain was excruciating. He woke up on a stretcher, surrounded by paramedics and his family. In the days that followed, as he recovered in the hospital, the memories of what he had seen and heard continued to haunt him. She knew the message she had received could not be ignored. With the support of her parents, she began to tell her story, first to family, then to friends, and finally to entire communities. Jake began speaking at schools, churches, and community centers, sharing the message of hope and warning he had received from Jesus. Not everyone believed his story, but Jake was undaunted. "It's not my job to convince people," he said, "but to plant a seed." Over time, his story attracted media attention, turning him into an inspiration to many. Prayer organizations and solidarity initiatives were born thanks to his message. Jake always remembered the words of Jesus, "Even the smallest act of faith can change the course of history." A year after the fall, Jake returned to the roof where it all began. Watching the sunset, his heart filled with gratitude, he felt a deep connection to everything around him. He thought back to the extraordinary journey he had experienced and the mission he had been entrusted with. "Thank you," he whispered, looking up at the sky as if he could see the face of Jesus among the golden clouds. That moment marked a new beginning. Jake decided to dedicate his life to spreading the message of hope and unity. She organized events to unite communities, worked with young and old to create intergenerational dialogue, and began a campaign to promote faith and the value of prayer in schools and public places. His words resonated across the nation, inspiring people of all ages and backgrounds to reflect on their role in bringing light to the world. Jake, over time, became not only a messenger, but also a living symbol of how a personal experience can profoundly transform an individual's life and the lives of those around him. And as the sun set, painting the sky with fiery colors, Jake stepped off the roof with peace in his heart. He knew that the journey had just begun, and that every day was an opportunity to make a difference. The memory of Jesus' words continued to guide him. Even the smallest act of faith can change the course of history.